So for the past 2 weeks, I have been working on the Wolverine from Zez Studios. So for those of you who don't know, Zez Studio is a Patreon that has probably some of the best models out there today. These models are well designed. They come with an array of busts, bust stands, also comes with artwork that you can get to display with your model. They have many different tiers available, and you can find the link in the description below. So I did print this in 1/4 scale on the Uniformation GK2 and also the Frozen Sonic Mega 8K. And the resin that I used was Water Fairy from Resin 1. This is some really good stuff if you want to avoid the mess of what normal resin gives you, cleaning an IPA and all that other stuff. This is water washable resin. And if you've taken a look at the video with my settings, those settings work perfectly with this water washable resin. And in this video, I'm going to show you a very simple way of painting camouflage. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and jump into this model that is already in progress. So this model has a lot of pieces here that I've had to prep, and now I'm getting ready to primer. The good thing about Zez Studios models are that the pieces go together very, very well. As you can see in this one here, you actually get 3 different portraits here. That little hole right there in the mouth is for a cigar. So you got one with a cigar, then you got one that has a helmet with a cigar, and then you get one of the angry face here. But I think there is a 4th one if I'm not mistaken. I'm sure there's a couple of pieces that I forgot to print, but there are a lot. So now let's get them in some primer. And my choice of primer this time around is the Vallejo Black Primer here. Getting ready to use this. Probably will take the whole entire bottle for this huge model here. So let's get started. Of course, when primering, make sure you do it in a well-ventilated area. This black primer goes on super easy, and it's an easy cleanup as well. I'm pretty much going to do all of the pieces in this black primer. And here I'm starting on the skin tones, laying down the base on all of the portraits and the body itself. And in case you didn't know, Wolverine does have a dog. Actually, it's a wolf. And I'm just going ahead and primering this in the same primer since it's going to be black anyway. And then on Wolverine's shirt, just using a titanium white here. Just going to dirty it up here in a little bit. And I'm also laying the base color on the trousers here, which is a camo green. I will use that same camo green on the helmets as well. There's actually 2 helmets. One that you'll actually get to be able to place on the diorama and another one on the heads. And on this one right here, I actually added the little trinkets as far as the pouches and all that stuff later. I don't know why I didn't do it to begin with, but I did it. And so here I am just dirtying up the shirt. We're going to go ahead and put a brown wash on this. And then I'm going to actually take some of that off with this paper towel here. Just do it very gently. Gives a nice, dirty, sweaty appearance. You know, he's in a jungle, so he's dirty. And so I'm just doing that, and gives it a nice effect. Once it's dried, you can go back in and add more if you want to in certain spots, or you can lighten it up with more white if you choose to do that as well. So on the camo, I start with the black areas first. I'm just doing this at random. I did a little research on some camo. I've been painting it for years, but I like to go ahead and start with the dark and work to light. And then I'll actually go in with a little bit of a saddle brown or a leather brown on top or adjacent to the black areas right here. And then after the brown, I'll do a tan or a beige as well and just kind of saturate it all together. And then you pretty much have all your base down. Once you get this like this, this is very bright in color, but we're going to dull it down with a black wash. As you can see with the lighter tone right here, the lighter colors and stuff, it's very, very vibrant. And you just want to go back in afterwards once it's dry, and then you're going to add this black wash to it all over and let it dry, of course. And you can actually do some of the wiping method that I use, in a lot of my washes. And this will actually help bring some of that vibrancy back if you want to. There are some areas that I want to kind of keep a light type of feel to it. I want it to stand out a little bit. And then once this is dry, then we're going to go back in and we're going to do some of that camo or olive drab dry brushing over the top of this. And the purpose of that is to get a worn type of feel for the camo. That way it kind of looks like it's just been worn and been weathered pretty good. And I'll also go and do the same thing with the helmets. I'll do that same wash and that same weathering technique over the top of the helmets as well before I add all of the details to it. And it's at this point where I start doing some of the rips and tears where the skin comes through, and we're going to add some blood to it where Wolverine is cut and he's bleeding, but I want to put this as a base first, and then working on some of the details with the helmet and with the rest of the body itself. This is where you can start kind of using your imagination a little bit. You can apply different colors if you choose to, as far as the bands and as far as some of the detail work. I use a saddle brown and a dark leather brown on the straps on the saddles and on the leg straps on the body. And then I'll go back in afterwards and I'll apply a wash on the top of that to weather it up really good and dull it down a little bit. And then also on the pouches here, I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit of a military camo green. That kind of gives it a little bit of contrast. And then it's time to do some of the detail work on the buckles and on the straps. Just painting those black, getting into there and just kind of making sure that everything is taken care of and tidy. This is some tedious work here, as many buckles and straps that were on this thing. And of course, once I get done with all of this, I'm going to go over it with another black wash to weather it up pretty good. Again, I want that just really drab, dirty effect here. And then I'm going to go in on the helmets and do a lot of the detail work on the lighters and on the badges. And I'll actually put a couple of things on there, a couple of written statements on there. You'll see them in a little bit. And then I use my gold for the shell casings. I love this gold. It weathers up really, really good. And then we just set it off with a nice green dry brushing over the top to make those details pop out. Then on the skin tones, I'm going in and doing the basic undertones and the basic shadows and shading. And while this is a tedious task here, this is a good opportunity to see what kind of blend you would like to have in your shadows. There are some areas on here that are darker than others, so take that into consideration whenever you're going in and shadowing these. You can also do this with pastels. You don't have to have an airbrush. Pastels work great. I've used those in the past and they turn out pretty good. And on the portraits, I do the same thing. I'm going in and I'm adding all the shadow areas, and I'll actually add some of the highlights a little bit later on. If I need to go back in and lighten up the skin tone, I'm able to do that. And this is where I use some red glaze effects onto the skin tones. This gives it a lot of volume into the face and makes a lot of the pores and a lot of the details really, really come out. And then on the feet and on the bandages, I'm using just a bone white base. I'll go back in and I will dirty those up with a brown wash and then make some of those areas pop back out with some bone white and just regular contrast white dry brushing over the top of it, because we're going to bloody those up a little bit as well. On the bone claws, I'm going to use that same bone white. We'll go back in and use a little bit of a brown and rusty brown wash on top of that. As you can see here, the wash really sets it off, gives it a lot of contrast, get into those deep dark crevices and everything. It makes it really pop out whenever you do that dry brushing effect over the top of it. And we're going to do the same thing with the bone claws here. We're going to give it that nice subtle wash, and then once we get done with it, let it dry, we're going to go back in and do a little bit of a bone wash on top of that. And in here I'm going to use a little bit of a black glaze onto the stubble areas and a little bit above the mustache area and on the sideburns. This is a really good method. You can use, again, pastels or an airbrush, whichever you choose. And now it's time to add a little blood in some of the cuts here. Yes, I know Wolverine has a healing factor, but it's pretty cool looking. And so I'm going to take in some of this with a stipple sponge. That's what I like to call it. And then I'm just going to add a little bit of blood splatter onto there in a lot of areas. We're going to add a lot of gore to this. And now it's time to go ahead and put everything together. I'm going to use that 5-minute epoxy I always talk about. That way that super glue does not come off later on in some future years. After a while it just starts to fade away, but this epoxy is like forever. This stuff is amazing. It keeps your models just totally glued together. And then I'm doing some detail on the actual razor claws. Going ahead and adding a chrome base on top of that before I add some of the blood on top of the knuckles and on top of the blades themselves. And yeah, we're kind of jumping around a little bit, but we're going back to the portraits a little bit and doing the eyes and doing the parts of the face. Remember, I have 4 of these things to do, so this is time consuming. Got to get those teeth right. So a lot of times in a model like this, I do paint them individually. The biggest challenge on the portraits were to get almost everything symmetrically right with each other. That way they almost look the same without having wonky eyes or anything else messed up that looks totally different. And getting the tones right when you're doing multiple portraits, it's a challenge. So I like to do it in batches. Whenever I do one, I do all the others at the same time. And sometimes it can be a little bit of tedious work, but it pays off in the end. And Wolverine here has a lot of raised hair on his arms, so I just took dry brushed a lot of black over the top of it. And here we bloody up everything up. Again, I know healing factor, but Wolverine has to have some blood on him, right? And now that I have the body all together, this is a perfect opportunity to go ahead and start all of the gore, all of the blood, get all the splatters where I want them, dirty up the shirt. And here we have all of the portraits completed. Man, it took a long time, but they come out really good. So as you can see, there's pretty much the same versions. The only difference is the helmeted version versus the non-helmeted version. And I only made one helmet because I can swap out between the two and not have to print and paint another one. And the helmeted version looks a little something like this. Turned out pretty snazzy, if I do say so myself. Very happy with it. And here on the base, I'm just doing some deep shading here. I've got some of this already painted up, been experimenting with a lot of the browns and a lot of the grays and stuff. After I get done painting the rocks a base gray, I will go in and I will put a black wash over the top of everything and do some dry brushing to accent some of those areas and bring out some of those details once again. On the snow, I'll just go in and paint everything an off-white because the snow that I'm going to be adding is a very, very stark white. It's very bright, so I do want a deeper undertone underneath it, if that makes sense, to bring out some of that snow that's on top. That way everything doesn't look too shaded out or too saturated out with that bright white. And of course, when adding this wash, it was a bumbling idiot and knocked my camera over. and also had a problem in the wash going into the snow. So don't eat the black snow. And on the vase, I'm just doing some detail work here with the plants, a little bit of dry brushing on some of the bark of the tree, and just trying to get it all the details to where this tree pops out, and adding the ammo to it. There's a bandolier belt, if I think that's what you call it, that actually goes onto the tree. I'm using this gold and copper and a black center, a gunmetal gray center on it. And also, I'll also do this in a black wash and do the dry brushing method as well over the top with a lighter green. And I'll actually put a little bit of a rust effect on some of the camo cans, and just making sure that everything looks just good before I add all this snow on the top of it. So for the snow effect, I'm going to use this powdered snow here. You can get this from like Hobby Lobby, or you can get it from any type of hobby store. It's pretty simple to use. It's just like a dust. Be careful, make sure you use like a plate or something underneath it. I'm going to put it into this little container here so it's easier for me to access. But you can put it on one of two ways. You can use an adhesive, or what I like to do is I like to seal the model, and while it's still wet, I'll apply it onto there and kind of dab it off a little bit, and it adheres to it pretty good. So we're going to give this a try here and see how it looks on this base. All right, so here I've sprayed the model with a little bit of this with the sealer. I'm going to put a little bit on it here and there and see how it works. And Wolverine went straight up onto the base, no problems whatsoever in getting him on there. Fits like a glove, a little bit of snug, but I actually like that. And then it's time to do his name tag or his dog tag. And you only get one of those really to print out, and it actually pops off. That way you can put it on multiple portraits. So for the wolf, I opted for a black wolf rather than a traditional wolf. And essentially all I've done here so far is I've painted everything black. I've done a little bit of white and a little bit of khaki brown inside some of the cracks and crevices here. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put a black wash on it, and I'm going to do some dry brushing over the fur here, and then do the eyes, and I think I'm just about done with that one. And then on the base here, painted everything, the snow white, and then I painted everything snow white, and the rocks here painted a gray. I'm going to do a black wash on here as well, and then I'm going to apply some of that same snow effect on top of this right here, and we're going to be about done with this model. So for this right here, I mixed up a little bit of baking soda, Elmer's glue, and water to do a little bit of this snow, and then I'll add the powder snow on top of it, just experimenting. And it actually turned out really, really well. You can actually use this with the other parts of the model if you choose to, and I actually did that. I went back in on the other part of the base of the model and used the same effect, and it turned out really, really good. Okay, everyone, that is it for the video. I hope you got something out of it and enjoyed the content. If you did, make sure to subscribe, hit the like button, all that good stuff. And also check out Zez Studios with that link in the description. Speaking of patrons, I do have to give a shout out to mine. Without them, of course, these videos probably wouldn't be possible. And if you're looking for a good Patreon with a good Discord, my Patreon link is also below in the description. We do have Model of the Month as well, and my next video is going to be one of my exclusive models, which is the Ultimate Captain America. I've already started on it here. And for 10 bucks a month, you basically get 2 models a month. One of them is a character from the G.I. Joe line, and another one is just whatever the heck I feel like putting out that month. And as always, everybody stay safe out there, get out and create something. Print, prep, paint, repeat. You know it. And until the next video, we'll see you. This is going to be my biggest print yet.